And welcome to part 3 of the Codependency Misdiagnosis video series, where we shine a spotlight on the often unconscious systemic entrapment of using labels like codependency that's preventing us from truly rising vertically instead of looping horizontally on this path. And to recap the structure of the series, in part 1, we discussed the low frequency of the word codependency and how it is not the root cause and often a complete misdiagnosis. In part 2, we dove deeper using Dr. Sandra Brown's work from her research and her book Women Who Love Psychopaths to explain that it's not codependency but high elevated traits that often put empathetic souls in hot waters. And in this part 3, titled Wound or Evolutionary Call to Mature Spiritually, we'll explore that in this age of materialism and spiritual disconnection, most people actually mistake a soul-level push to evolve spiritually for a personality wound. And that we need to train ourselves to rise into higher and higher levels of consciousness through our inner work journey, and not to pathologize every feeling of pain or everything that goes wrong in our life. So this will be an invitation to completely shift you from I am wounded to I'm being called to evolve, to ascend one full octave in consciousness, essentially. And this is also the part in the series where I'm attempting to bring back much needed meaning using the work of Rudolf Steiner, because there is meaning and there is method to this madness, believe it or not. There is a reason why we are incarnated here. There is something that we're meant to be doing to evolve. And I think that's the deepest story behind what we're doing. I think that's what's really badly needed for everyone. And as a reminder, if this series is bringing you clarity, feel free to share it around to someone who needs it. Knowledge is power, and knowledge shared is power multiplied. So to start with, I'd like to recap the 3 layers of the self that I took you through in part 2. So this is a slide that I took you through in part 2, where we discussed the very important distinction to make between the nurture layer and the nature layer that's often forgotten in the psychology field. A lot of the healing that's very popular is really just healing the acquired layer at the personality level. But today I've created a new slide because I want to take you even deeper, because I want to show you the vertical evolution of our consciousness that we are striving for in the evolutionary context. And to be clear again, ascension is fluid and it's overlapping and rhythmic, so it's not a staircase exactly like that. This is just to explain with a visual. So this is to show you that we are tasked to move beyond healing, just the personality level, into an ascension of identity. So the seat of your consciousness is meant to rise. So the personality level, as mentioned before, is just really, it's important and it's needed to start with, but it's really just to stabilize, purify, and integrate the vessel, right? So it's just to achieve this inner coherence and quietness that's needed to hear your soul's guidance. And that's very much needed because in this world of disconnection and, this merry-go-round and rat race, we are just so constantly distracted and overstimulated that we can't even hear this guidance, right? So this level is very much needed because that's actually how you achieve a necessary stable energetic field so you can even start to reconnect and hear the soul's guidance. But that's not where we stop, right? We need to actually rise vertically to the soul level. And it takes immense effort and immense inner work. So it's a progressive shift in our consciousness. It's a progressive shift from healing to awakening. From healing the personality layer to evolving our soul and rising into spirit. And the soul level is the bridge. The spirit level really is the destination. And what it feels like is that you're moving from guidance, which is the soul providing that guidance, to feeling this direct power. So the reason why I've got these arrows like this as well, it's because once you get to the soul level, that's when the spirit can descend into your body. It's all happening inside of you. It's all you. You know, it's basically an integration of these three levels within your body. And so rising to the soul level will come with evolutionary friction to push you to evolve into wholeness. And so this will be at times very difficult karmic lessons, relational contracts, shadow integration, polarity balancing, purification of the astral and emotional body. Basically, essentially, the entire ascension journey is to purify this astral body, it's to purify your field. But it is not the path of least resistance, and it is not the path of bliss and the path of no effort. These are a sure way to keep you at the personality level. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not just stabilizing your field that's needed as part of the inner work. It's actually to allow some of that friction. Like, to be able to rise to the soul level vertically, it's going to come with a lot of grief, a lot of pain, and a lot of resistance, because you are literally evolving yourself out of that nature level. It's not just a nurture level. That's just to stabilize your field. You're going to have to go against things that are deeply wired and deeply seated at the nature level. So for empathetic souls, for example, coming to a place where you see the value of your heart and you put these unwavering boundaries will not be the path of least resistance. It's going to be the path that you resist the most, and it's going to be the path that you try to bypass. But if you do this work and you manage to really rise to the soul level, and that takes time and effort, you basically come to a place when you no longer identify with personality wounds. You completely release that. It's no longer relevant. The way you know that spirit is starting to come in, which again, to be crystal clear, the 3 layers are not stacked like floors, so they are interpenetrating fields. So the spirit will begin to break through before the soul work is complete, right? I mean, you know, because this spirit level feels so different to the soul guidance. The soul guidance is more loving, more patient. The spirit level is just commanding. It's a demand for truth. It's a complete refusal to remain small. It's pure will and power and clarity and discernment. It's an unwavering energy. It's actually still loving, but it's true love, which is a refusal to let you play small. It's felt completely different in your body. So essentially, this entire inner work journey, what I'm trying to say is that it's not just healing wounds or perceived wounds. And it becomes very important to focus on the right things that are relevant for you. You need to have extreme discernment before you take on a label to make sure that it's actually applicable to you. Otherwise, you're going to lose so many years looping horizontally and wasting so much time. There is so much more that we're doing. And what we're doing is an evolution of consciousness, which is so much more than just healing childhood trauma. And that's why it feels so hard as well. So each wave of purification, you know, as you do the inner work, allows more and more spirit light to enter. That's how it works. And the way I like to conceptualize it as well is that because essentially this inner work process is a purification of your astral body, the way I like to conceptualize it is that it allows you to clear it. So as the astral body becomes more and more clear and you remove the fog, you are able to, like, the light of your spirit is able to enter more and more. And so things become so much more clearer for you. And your power comes in intensely. So the spirit is always present, right? Even at the personality level. But because we've got that fog, it's not always active and we can't always hear it. So the inner work that we're doing is not just to heal our childhood wounds or, you know, be happy. It's to be able to hear the voice of our spirit. So in my opinion, what's missing from the conversation is this map, right? It's understanding what we're doing here from an evolutionary standpoint. And because we don't have this map, right, because it's, we're coming out of this spiritual amnesia period of the Kali Yuga, we're just fumbling in the dark. We don't understand what's going on. And then we get stuck in toxic and abusive dynamics at times. Because we can't see where we're going. We don't understand the work that we're meant to be doing. We're viewing these relationships as just, the love relationship that we've chosen for this lifetime and we have to stay with it, when actually we should be looking at every relationship as a push to evolve. No matter how fucked up it is, that's actually the power that we take, right? It doesn't mean that this relationship happen for you or that abuse is for your evolution. It doesn't mean that at all. What that means is that we are currently living in a very low frequency on this planet, and we share this world with people who are polarized completely the opposite of us. And they will have to answer to the karmic repercussions of what they've done. Nobody gets scot-free on a spiritual level. But the most empowering and intelligent thing to do for us is to take whatever comes our way, to understand this map, and to take whatever comes our way to rise. We use it as fuel to rise. We do not bend, we do not lay down. We look at it as a testing ground to be able to get ourselves out of that frequency. We use it to shine a light on our blind spots, and it will hurt at times. Absolutely. It's brutal. But if we can do this work to shine a light on our blind spots and to raise our frequency, then we become completely untouchable at that level. So the next thing that I want to do is to use the work of Rudolf Steiner to take you through the evolutionary story of what we're doing here. Because again, I feel like there is so much meaning that's missing. We are all fumbling in the dark, and there are a lot of narratives that make you think that it's a mistake, this is a prison planet, and it's really not. Yes, we are living in difficult times and the work is difficult, but there is so much meaning in this work. So this is the map that I wanted to show you, which is showing the development of spiritual organs through the ages. And I feel like this map helps us understand what we are asked to do at this stage of our spiritual evolution and what we are struggling with and why. So this is based again on the work of Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy. So you've got astrological ages, like you've got the age of Aries, the age of Pisces, and the age of Aquarius, which are astronomical epochs determined by the precession of the equinoxes. So these are cosmic and impersonal ages that are happening regardless. And as you can see from these dates, and contrary to popular belief, we actually aren't in the age of Aquarius yet, not by a long shot. And then you've got the age of Michael, which is a bridge. And as you will see, it overlaps in terms of dates with the age of Pisces, because the age of Michael is not an astronomical epoch. It is defined by Steiner not as an astrological age, but as a spiritual rulership period within Steiner's hierarchy of archangelic regencies. So Steiner teaches that the archangels take turns guiding humanity in cycles of roughly 300 to 350 years. And each archangel brings a specific impulse and task and quality to human evolution. So these cycles are part of the spiritual governance of Earth, not astronomy. And the age of Michael is meant to help us prepare so we're ready for the age of Aquarius. So going back to the spiritual organ development, you can see that what we've been doing these last 2,000 years is the development of the spiritual mind organ, which was a development of logical thinking. Steiner calls this intellectual soul. So we have to understand that it's also a state of consciousness, a way of perceiving the world. And that was the birth of rationality, logic, law, order, structure, the emergence of personal individual identity, where humans began to think for themselves and feel like separate individuals with their own thoughts and inner life. Because according to Steiner, before that, we used to operate more in terms of a group soul, in terms of unity consciousness. So these three ages show the development of the ego consciousness, which is fairly recent in the grand scheme of things. As I said, we operated before more from a group consciousness, and we didn't actually have this sense of individuality. I know it's hard to conceptualize, but as I will be walking you through this table, it starts to make sense in terms of what you've struggled with in your life, and what everyone is struggling with, and where we're at in terms of humanity. It actually starts to make a lot of sense. So to recap, the age of Aries is the age where humanity first experiences itself as a separate individual, capable of rational thought and personal agency. The age of Pisces is the age where the moral, spiritual heart awakens. And that's not emotional heart, that's not sentimental love. It's the awakening of conscience and moral intuition that becomes possible. So that's what Steiner calls consciousness soul. So it's the birth of inner moral life, so a sense of conscience, compassion, and the ability to feel truth inwardly. Humans begin to sense the reality of other people's inner worlds, and the heart awakens as a moral organ, softening the rigid ego boundaries that we developed in the age of Aries, and opening the capacity for empathy, devotion, and genuine human connection. So you can see, when you look at a map like this, right, that you can see the people who did the work, right? They did the hard work, and those who didn't. So you can see from this map that we are not all, contrary to popular belief, the same in humanity at this time and wired the same way, because we are not at the same level of evolution. There are people who are really behind in terms of evolution. And you can see that many empathetic souls carry a profound spiritual gift, right? An open, sensitive, deeply compassionate heart from this age of development. So you actually have done a lot of work to be able to develop this. And I want to emphasize this because part of our job is actually to see that and appreciate that, so we actually protect it. Because, knowing the history of the last 2,000 years, we all know that this must have come through a lot of pain and suffering. But the problem with any age is that there is a shadow side to the age. And the shadow of the Passion age was really bad teachings, really, that turned the virtue of sacrifice, which was actually supposed to be self-transcendence, into martyrdom, for example. Narratives that weaponize the empath's highest virtues of love, mercy, kindness, and turning them into tools of self-destruction, right? So martyrdom, over-tolerance, enabling, coddling, self-sacrifice, narratives that say love will fix them, or, love conquers all, or they didn't mean it, or kill them with kindness, or we are all wounded. Hurt people. So it installed a perceptual virus, I would say, a mind virus or belief that goodness requires suffering and that love must endure. And so our job at this point is to purify this false teaching. So the age of Michael is the bridge. And this is what brings the development of a spiritual will. And this is what actually allows us powerfully to purify, these false teachings and to step into our power and to do all the work that we need to be doing, so we are able to move into the age of Aquarius. It is eventually. But some of us are doing this work early, and some of us will already develop the etheric heart perception of the age of Aquarius at this time, which is basically the birth of a new organ of perception. But for the purpose of this map, what I'm trying to say is that we're living at a time when we are asked right now, all of us, to develop this spiritual will. And not only that, when we do it, when we start doing it, we are backed by a cosmic power. We are supported. So it's safe to do it in this day and age. And that's going to be the birth of our inner strength, our capacity for discernment, courage, boundaries, and really the ability to stand in one's own core center. And it's a shift towards more individuation, being able to act from your own inner authority rather than external approval or inherited belief. We're letting go of all the gurus and all of that stuff. Now it's inward. Now you need to actually tap into your own power. And this will awakens a force of clarity in you that will allow you to cut through so much illusion and allow you to really step into that sense of spiritual sovereignty and responsibility. So this is the task of our time. This is why we incarnated and what we need to be doing. So the age of Michael is really an age that's like a very important bridge between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius that brings and amplifies the qualities of truth, clarity, courage, discernment, and seeing between what's real, what's not real, what's good, what's evil. So again, it's reassuring because, and I know that I've lived it and I know others have lived it. My own mother is living it right now. When you are starting to only focus on truth as the highest value, and you are starting to actually take action in your life from that perspective, to put those boundaries, to activate that power in you, you are supported by a higher power. It is safe to do so. And I want to say that because I don't believe that was the case in the age of Pisces, and that's probably also why a lot of people are scared to do this work. So bringing it back to the topic, of codependency and why empathetic souls have struggled, right? It's that some of us leaned more into the heart than the mind, firstly. Because, if you can see, like, some other people don't struggle as much. And I think it's because they are much more in the mind and their work is going to be completely different. They're actually going to have to do the difficult work of heart opening. But empathetic souls are already in their heart, and it's, creating an imbalance through these false teachings that has led to a lot of self-destruction. As anyone, who has been caught in an abusive environment for decades would know, because it affects your health eventually. And so we found out the hard way, right, that love is not enough, that we must vet character and be discerning. And so at this time, if we can do the job of tapping into that spiritual will and activating it, we can elevate ourselves out of that looping and that low frequency. And as you can see from this table, you're right on time to do this work. You're not stupid, you're not weak, you're right on time, okay? And when I look at this map as well, I feel like that's why the empath-narcissist dynamic is so cosmically ironic in a way. Because from an evolutionary perspective, the empath is actually miles ahead than the narcissist. You're intuitive, you're relationally intelligent, spiritually attuned, right? But then you often end up feeling small, broken, and unworthy through these dynamics. And meanwhile, you've got the narcissist's sharp, cold intellect that's mistaken for strength in our culture, right? Like they've got a complete imbalance within themselves, within their spiritual organs. The heart is completely shut. And so, like this society looks at the sharp, cold intellect as strength, and then it looks at the empath intuition and sensitivity as weakness and oversensitivity. It's completely backwards. So now I actually want to take you through another slide that I've prepared and to introduce you to the concept of dream consciousness by Rudolf Steiner. And that's to explain the anatomy of the empath, so we understand what's happening inside of us from a spiritual anatomy perspective, so we fully understand our limitations and the work that we need to be doing. Rudolf Steiner explains that we are living at a time when many of us have what he calls remnants of the dream consciousness. And this is what I used to call the rose-colored glasses. So that's an ancient mode of perception where boundaries were fluid and everything was experienced as spiritual unity. So like I said before, we used to live in ancient times as more as a group consciousness. We didn't really have this sense of ego individuality. And so we lived more in a dreamlike, imaginative group consciousness state where perception was imaginative, consciousness was dreamlike, and the individuality was not yet formed. We truly were living in oneness. And this is why empaths tend to love, the grand spiritual teachings about oneness, loving everyone no matter what, all of that stuff, right? We come from that. We've retained that, and we've got this remnant of dream consciousness. And what Steiner explains is that earlier forms of consciousness do not vanish. They become sub-layers of the soul body. So the dream consciousness went into our astral body, which is also called the emotional body. And so you could say that, the issue is that we haven't purified this yet, right? We haven't let go, and we're still operating from this remnant of that dream consciousness. And so what happens is that this makes us perceive things through the lens of the unity, goodness, assuming that we're all the same, that we're all wired the same, that if someone's not acting right, surely it's because they've been hurt somehow. All of that stuff, right? We have an inability to perceive malice, especially when it comes from a loved one. And dream consciousness, like I said, lives in the feeling life, not the thinking life. So souls like empath, who leaned into the heart more, kept it. And souls who leaned into the mind dissolved it. So that's why also we don't all have it. But I would argue that a big proportion of the population actually still has this remnant of dream consciousness. And that's why you hear so many stories of people getting stuck in cults and all of that stuff. It's because we've got this blindness to evil and predators. We cannot conceptualize that someone could purposely want to hurt you. So if we summarize, the empath spiritual anatomy, you could say we have a highly developed heart organ. We've got the moral intuition, attunement, and permeability. We don't have those rigid boundaries. That's why we absorb everything. So that makes us feel deeply. We've got a functional mind organ, so we can actually see clearly. I would argue that it's not that we don't see, although maybe sometimes we don't pay enough attention, but I would argue that actually we see things. But then we've got the remnants of that dream consciousness that makes you interpret what you see idealistically. You're putting on those rose-colored glasses, so you're not really looking at facts. You're overriding, what you're seeing through this naive idealism. And then we've got an underdeveloped will organ, the boundaries, action, sovereignty, that makes you fail to act. So that's the spiritual anatomy, and that's what needs to be rebalanced. And that's when we use the spiritual will of the Age of Michael to help us do that. But to come back to the dream consciousness, that's why in your life, you've often projected goodness onto others. You've bypassed the physical reality, and you're not seeing someone for who they actually is, but who their soul could be. You're actually projecting your own light onto others. So dream consciousness doesn't block perception, like I said. We're still seeing, but it blocks the interpretation, or rather it locks you into an idealistic, incorrect interpretation. So often we see the truth, but the dream consciousness prevents you from believing it, and the dormant will prevents you from acting on it. And this is why we get hurt. Not because we are codependent, not because we're not intelligent, not because we're weak. Empaths actually tend to see and feel the truth, but they just cannot believe the truth because they still carry that unity consciousness. And this is why, empaths often say, I sensed it, but I couldn't imagine they meant harm. I saw the signs, but I thought they were wounded, not malicious. I felt the danger, but I couldn't fathom someone would be so cruel. It looks like living a lot in the daydreaming, in the romantic fantasy. So essentially, it's not seeing reality as it is, but through rose-colored glasses, and really refusing to see people as they are, a reluctance to acknowledge malice in others and acknowledge that evil does exist. And you can see it because in the spiritual community, it's so popular to say that evil doesn't exist. And, it's so popular to still talk about this unity consciousness and all that stuff. And that's the worst thing for empathetic souls who are already so much in their heart. We need a completely different approach. This is not the task of this time. Because being a dreamer in the physical world is a liability, as a lot of us have found out the hard way. We assume that others have the same conscience than we do. So because of that, we interpret harm as a misunderstanding because, you would never harm intentionally yourself. And so you give the benefit of the doubt, because you are collaborative and solution-oriented. You think maybe that's trauma that needs to be healing because you can't conceive that someone could actually intentionally want to harm you. So none of this is weakness, right? But it's a natural byproduct of a spirit that hasn't really learned the harsh realities of the world, of the physical world. It's still trying to operate in the physical world as if it is the spiritual world. It's just not like that. And so we have to come into, what I would call street smart spirituality, where we are fully present in the reality of the world. One thing that I want to say as well is that you can argue that when you go through abuse, right, or through life in general, you can acquire coping mechanisms as well. But what I'm trying to say is that those coping mechanisms are latching onto an existing mechanism, which is a dream consciousness. So it amplifies something that's already there. And so when you focus on the nurture layer of healing, yes, you can actually remove the coping mechanisms that were a byproduct of going through difficult experiences. But removing the dream consciousness at the core happens at the nature level. It's a much more deeper and profound work because just healing the nurture level, like I've mentioned before, it won't prevent you from encountering or attracting more narcissists in your life. When you heal that at the soul layer, at the nature level, that's when you can't attract that anymore. So coming back to the age of Michael, the age of Michael for us is the shattering of the rose-colored glasses. And let me make something very clear. For us empathetic souls, this awakening is brutal. For me, it came with grieving for 2 years. Because it's difficult, right? That dream consciousness feels so good. I still remember what it feels like. I still remember going through all of that. And at times I wish I could have put those rose-colored glasses back on. Like becoming awake to the reality of the world and how much evil there is and what's happening is brutal when you've been living in this dream consciousness. And it's brutal because when the will awakens, when we can tap into that age of Michael development of the spiritual will organ, it burns through the lies. That's why it brings so much clarity, because it's a burning process. It will burn through you, the projection, the idealism, the spiritualized naivete, the unity fantasy, and this inherited dream consciousness. And so that's our work, right? To use that spiritual will that is accessible to us at this time to do this work of purifying all three organs, really, so they become one cohesive whole. And that happens through dismantling a lot of unhealthy programming. So that fog, right, that's preventing you from accessing that spiritual will, because it comes directly from spirit, that fog is often those deep-seated beliefs that are just not true. You know, the belief that because you got married, you know, you've signed a contract for life, no matter what. The belief that love conquers all, that, you know, you need to kill them with kindness, that, you know, if they wound you, it's because they wounded themselves. It shatters all of that completely to make you see yourself completely accurately, in the sense that you see your heart and you see how hard you've worked at this for lifetimes. So you can actually activate this power inside of you to want to protect it, right? Because often the protector is actually powerfully activated for everyone else in your life, but not yourself. And to stop projecting goodness onto other people because it's simply not there. And when we do that, we stop resisting the call to evolve out of this tolerating dysfunction. It's coming to a place where we see reality exactly as it is. So mainstream psychology, pop culture psychology diagnoses this as codependency or low self-esteem. But it's not low self-esteem, I would argue, that puts empathetic souls into hot waters. It's the ideal of love, unity, collaboration. It's this idealism. It's a projection of this idealism. And yes, on top of that, you can put, you know, other stuff that gets you locked in, right? You know, if you're depending on someone financially, like, but that's layers on top of it. I'm arguing that the core issue is this. It's essentially a lack of discernment at this time on the planet because of this idealism. And again, if you observe the spiritual community, you can see this is so rife. There are still people who say there's no such thing as good and evil. It's all about coming back to the heart and to unity consciousness. That's not what we are tasked to do at this time on the planet. At this time on the planet, it's essential to see evil, and especially for empathetic souls. This is our task. We need to do this. We need to shatter the rose-colored glasses by using that force that's accessible to us now. We are backed, and I can promise you that, because I've done this. I've observed many souls doing it. My own mother is doing it. You are supported. Magical things will start to happen when you finally have the courage to leave that relationship, to want more for yourself. So we are not healing a wound called codependency. We are tasked to rise in levels of consciousness. We need to go so much deeper than that, because the task is to step into that sovereignty, to clear the fog. So the nurture layer is very much needed. But the fog is also at the nature layer as well. And so we need to clear everything that's making us not see things clearly, right? That's still making this dream consciousness strong. And you deprogram yourself one faulty programming at a time. You dismantle it one day at a time. and you force yourself to come back to the present moment and to the facts every time, because it's a muscle that you're going to have to build. But we'll go through all the details of that in the next episode. So if we look at the nature versus nurture layer, you can see that the personal will, because there's a distinction between the personal will and the spiritual will, even though both are needed. You need personal will to be able to tap into the spiritual will. The personal will only changes behavior. The spiritual will changes frequency. So when you tap into that spiritual will and you shift your frequency from inside, you're no longer going to have to be hyper vigilant to pick up on all the red flags, do all that work, right? That's exhausting, vet everyone. Like, your field becomes such a repellent for narcissistic people that they will not be able to be around you. The spiritual will doesn't try to fix the abuser, try to understand, try to harmonize the field, try to patch things up. The spiritual will is an eviction notice. It senses the parasitic invasion, someone trying to feed off of you. And it's an unwavering eviction notice. It's a completely different frequency. And so can you see that when you use low frequency labels like codependency, it becomes impossible to activate this? This inner frequency shift is what breaks the cycle well and truly. You will not attract the same caliber of people in your life. And when you do this work as well, you will, because the thing is, when you focus on hypervigilance and reading the flags, you might be able to not attract narcissists, obviously. But the other side of the spectrum for empaths that nobody's talking about is that we end up usually on the other side of the spectrum, attracting someone who's quite disempowered, and you still end up carrying everything anyway. Yes, they are loving, they're no longer abusive, or trying to manipulate you and gaslight you and all that stuff. But what we're after is reciprocal giving, right? Takers are not all just abusive. Takers can just be very disempowered souls who haven't done the work to really activate their own power either. So that's what we want, right? We want to rise to a level where we can attract a peer, and that's available to us. It's coming to a place where it's reciprocal relationship or nothing. It's to build the spiritual will that matches the size of your heart. It's to understand the fruits of the heart you carry that has come very likely through a lot of suffering and pain over many lifetimes. To appreciate this gem and to not want to have to put up defensive walls and to have to shrink and to have to protect yourself like this. To still want to remain open, but doing it differently. We're bringing in the sword. We're shifting the frequency so that we don't have to shrink ourselves in any way, shape, or form. This is what brings us, brings the rose-colored glasses down, the dream consciousness down. This is what actually allows us to see in the dark, like I like to say. You'll be able to see everything clearly. You won't even have to try anymore. It's giving you this powerful vision. And so the task is to mature spiritually. The call is to evolve and mature spiritually. And so when you have all these narratives making you focus on wounds to heal, you're spending all that time doing that and you're not understanding the bigger picture of what you're undertaking. And in my opinion, you can only tap into that power and that sovereignty when you understand the bigger picture and you no longer focus on the wounds, the phantom wounds. This is a complete waste of time, and it goes against the very activation that needs to happen inside of you. And so it really pays to study these maps that I've presented from advanced initiates that have come before us to give us this gift, to be able to answer the evolutionary call of this time, so we no longer have to learn through pain and suffering. Because it doesn't have to be that way. We can't let others who haven't done the work that you've done drag you down with them, because that's what's happening. It's capping and preventing you from evolving if you let it. Because that's the thing, right? What I'm challenging and what I'm presenting in this series is the systemic entrapment of words, right, that disempower us. But at the end of the day, it can only disempower us if we let it. And so we take everything that comes our way and we use it as fuel to activate this spiritual will and this power inside of us. It doesn't mean that everything that comes our way is for us, for our benefit, because we are removing the rose-colored glasses. We know it's not. But something they don't understand is that spirit is so powerful, it can use anything as fuel. And that's when you become the power alchemist. And you can actually fast track this vertical alignment, this vertical rising in levels of consciousness through any bullshit that's sent your way. So this concludes part 3, which is, no longer looking at wounds and actually looking at anything that happened in our life as a call to graduate to the next level. So we can really step up and mature spiritually and on all levels and propel our spiritual growth, so we're no longer operating at that low frequency, attracting all sorts of wounded animals who need your light to feed off of. And next week in part 4, we'll discuss all of this in a lot more detail. This will be the part where it's a lot more practical, and I give a lot more practical guidance in terms of how we achieve that balance within ourselves, that wholeness, and how we truly rise into the creator consciousness. So we're no longer at the mercy of what comes our way, but we actually command our field in a much bigger way. So that's what I had for you today. Thanks for watching. And if that's been helpful or if that's brought you clarity, please leave me a like or share with anyone who you think may need it. And please leave me a comment. I'd love to know if you have anything you'd like to contribute and if you have any questions. See you next time.